Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us from around Japan and around the world. Here in Tokyo, it's 7 p.m. on the 18th of November, 2024. I am Patricia Yarrow, the boss, the instigator of Informasia, and for now, for everything, I am to blame. Okay, tonight we welcome a longtime friend of many of you, Michael Watson. Born in Australia after the age of 3, Michael Watson was brought up in Canada and in the US before setting off for a British university. He studied European languages and medieval literature, then moved to Japan in 1980, and has just retired from teaching at Meiji Gakuin University after some 40 years. His main research areas have been pre-modern Japanese narrative and drama, focusing especially on the tale of the Heike and No theater. He now lives in the southeast corner of Fukushima Prefecture, an ideal place for cycling and beach walking. He'll be talking to us today about a No play that dramatizes the uncanny encounter of a famous Japanese monk on his way to India. With that, Michael, the Zoom stage is all yours.
Okay, so can you see my screen? My
Yes?
slides? Okay, well, I'll get going. I've got a lot of slides, but I'll manage. So I may go rather fast. Some of them got a lot of text to them, but I won't be reading everything. But I hope it'll be interesting. So I'm going to talk. I keep on changing the title here, so there's no really fixed title. But the long Japanese afterlife, the reception of a very famous Chinese pilgrim to India. These pilgrims are often called the three treasures, would go to India and bring back sutras. And this is the most famous one. And his name is Xuanzang, but I'll be avoiding my bad pronunciation in Chinese. Known to many of you, but to say the Genjō is the same characters. The first two characters is Genjō Sanzō, that's the three treasures, and Hōshi meaning priest, and he lived in the 7th century here. But what is fascinating is he's not just a major figure in China or in the history of Buddhism, but he's a major figure in art. And I was only relatively recently discovered there is, in fact, a no play about him, which is what I'm talking about here. So in this picture here from the Metropolitan, we see him here with what was described as usually as a Central Asian, not necessarily Indian, but a Central Asian or Western Asian man who's holding a sutra apparently this is more the typical size of the Sanskrit sutra, where the pilgrim, as I'll often refer to him, Genjō, is holding a Chinese translation because he was one of the great translators of sutras. So that's the background to him, and you'll hear more about him here. Perhaps the most famous image we have of him, I saw they had two of them, both in the Tohoku in Ueno, the Tokyo National Museum, the two nearly identical ones. This is the earlier one, and it's a national treasure. The Chinese think it comes from China, but the Japanese are proud to think of it here. And here he's carrying a backpack here, a backpack which is very much part of his iconography. And in a recent film, I put the link in the chat if you're interested here, rather cheesy film, a Chinese film. They actually seem to have modeled this backpack, which appears in almost every scene on this famous painting here. So he carried the backpack naturally with his bedding and so forth, but then he came back with a tremendous number of sutras, more than 600 sutras. So why does it interest me? I'm not a sinologist, although I have a great interest in these sorts of things. I'm actually interested in a very niche area of no research, which is the fact that there are about 100 plays that are performed often. There are about 240 plays which are considered part of the repertoire. They're regularly performed by the different schools of No here, but many more are in early Meiji editions, like the one shown here on the right. And this is where I first met this play called Dai Hanya, which means the Great Wisdom. The Great Wisdom Sutra here. And this edition contained a little bit of annotation, and it was helpful to know who it was from here. But why I'm interested in these kind of plays is that they're actually texts of more than 2,500 plays, so more than 10 times the number that are performed today that have survived. But this play is an unusual one in that it has been successfully revived. It was never forgotten. There were many editions, modern editions even in the 1990s, but in the 1980s, 84, there was a 20th century restoration. Now, what does that mean? They have a text. The musicians, the flute, the drummers, they know their business. They have to play the music that's appropriate here. The stage business of the choreography, that has to be worked out. The text, though, has survived, and the musical text it also survives in a way in the form that we who study know use it today, which is these texts with a certain amount of musical annotation, but a lot has to be done to it here. So it was revived with a certain amount of one, and that's the version I've translated. I was very lucky also in that I found that there would be a DVD, which I'll be showing you some images from the cover and from a DVD with subtitles in Japanese, which helped me imagine as I read the text to work out what happens on the stage here. So it's a 15th century play. It's from the peak period of no plays, but it's based on the 7th century pilgrim, but his encounter. Many no plays are about encounters with ghosts, encounters with spirits, and so forth. And this is no exception, but there are many other ways. It's a very unusual play here. So it fell out of active performance repertoire, as we say, but many copies, manuscripts, also early printed versions survive, including a Kanzei school, one of the major schools of Noh, the one that I studied, chant book, so something that could be used for singing. So people may have continued to sing it, even though it wasn't being performed. Also, though, and interestingly, an ancient mask survived, the one that you see in the photograph here. And this survived, and they thought it was the mask, the Hanya mask, the sort of demon mask for the famous play Dojoji. And then someone realized that, no, it had been handed down. This was actually the mask of called Shinjo or Jinja that I'll be explaining later here, this river god, if you like. A famous critic, a playwright, revised it. He didn't make many changes, but he revised it. And then one of the top, also a national treasure, living national treasure, performed the first version here in 83 or 84. I need to check my notes again here. So we do actually have, unusually, because we don't often have this sort of information, we have the information that this play was performed on a certain time and day. They performed, this is a list of 11 plays, and it was performed number 4 in the program. Number 3 was Sumidagawa, and the one after that was Jinin Koji. And most of these plays are still performed today, but it was one of there are 2 or 3 here that are not performed, and it's not called Daihanya. It's not called the Great Wisdom Sutra. It's called Sanzō Hōshi, the 3 treasure monk, but who else could that be but this one play? And we do have some versions, so we're pretty sure that this is the one here. The person who wrote this diary wrote a lot about cultural figures, and very interesting factor, but I won't spend more on this here. So we do know it was performed then at this time, so it must have been written sometime before that here. The second major performer of this role, with permission of the first major performer, is Kansei Yoshimasa, who performed it in the version that I have the DVD of it, and then more recently in 2022 in Yakshi, the great temple in Nara, which is very significant because Yakshi today has literally dozens and dozens of paintings of this character Genjō or Xuanzang, the historic one, because his sutra translations are very central to the sect of Buddhism that's most important in Nara. So I based my translation on these ones here. So here's another image from the Kamakura period. Many of them, I was very lucky that someone just told me just last Saturday that I should go along to the Mitsui Kinen Museum last day, and I caught the last day of an exhibition where they featured, again, many sculptures of the man holding his sutra with boots under him. This is the Kamakura image here. The exhibition, unfortunately, just finished here. So I'm going to go through the play, not everything. My translation's now 20 pages long, but I've included the Japanese text, the Romanized text. So for those of you who want to look at the Japanese, go ahead. And of course, it's rather than put in phonetically Ruby, but I'll be focusing mainly. So I've been fiddling with format, and today I won't ask this kind of group to comment, but if anybody wants to contact me or later in the discussion about exactly what sort of information do people need to know reading a no play. But that's not the main focus of this talk. But for me, it's a big thing. For example, do you talk about the music? Do you talk about the stage action? Well, I'm thrown everything in, everything but, and that's how I do it here. So this is an example where I put everything in, and basically I'm going to be focusing for you on the text here. So the opening of a no play begins with a shidai, it's a certain type of music. The waki enters and he sings this one here. And we immediately start with the translation problem because the path to teaching is open. Oh, akitsutsu. Akitsutsu is an old word for Japan. It means the dragonfly isle or something, or it means the autumn something. It's a Manyo expression. It's here solely for poetical effect here. It just means michi mo aki. It means the way will be opened. So he's traveling now. He's traveling on his way and trying to get the great sutras from India. So that's the gist of the story, this one here. This is what it looks like in that Utaibon, the one that was produced when they revived the text here, so fairly readable for Utaibon here. And so the information about how is it sung is the kind of information you get at the top, that the melodic style and the rhythm, which I won't go into. And it sounds something like this. So that would be a chant. This is a chanting beginning, and then the line is repeated here. It goes on with what we call a nanori, which is where the main character, the waki is the pilgrim, the sort of secondary character, but he's one of the two major figures here. He introduces himself. He says his name here. And this is typical of all plays, Japanese or ones that are set outside of Japan. And here he says who he is. He's a monk, a three-treasure monk. He's concerned of sutras, and he comes from a certain temple in China, in Tang, and he's visited the capital, which at this time was in Chang'an, modern Xi'an, and he wants to bring to this land of China, the sacred scroll of the Great Wisdom Sutra. So, in fact, he brought 600 or more sutras back, and one of them was this massive volume, many volume for the Great Wisdom Sutra, but the Daihanya he mentions here. I'll just sing a little bit, but the rest. So, it's a typical beginning here. Don't worry, I'm not going to say much more. I went out run out of time if I do. So he says here that he is going to leave China and travel to India. And the word, if you're not familiar with this period, Murakoshi is the old word for China, and Tenjiku is a word for India, capital letters perhaps. The Michiyuki appears in many no plays, the opening one. If somebody is traveling from A to B, going to visit an old battlefield or going to make a pilgrimage, going to a temple and a shrine. And in Michiyuki, the travel songs in Japanese no plays, usually you mention lots of place names on the way from the old capital to Azuma, to the east or wherever. Here, there are almost no names at all. We come to one on the next page here. Lots of descriptive words, fields and rivers and mountains, but very, very vague in terms of geography, which, of course, is a problem. But it's quite a lyrical passage here. And then as travel songs nearly always end, it ends with an expression like "Suki ni keri," I have arrived, or we have arrived. I should say in this version that I've seen, and there's only he's alone on this journey. But in earlier versions, they mentioned that he would be accompanied by a couple of monks who, on the no stage, would be performed with, would be wakitsure, the companions. It doesn't really matter. He seems to be alone, and he never refers to it here. So he has arrived. Where has he arrived to? This is the question here. Well, he's arrived to a place where he knows the name, or he has heard of it here, but he's not quite sure if it's right or not. The Ryusa Tokaya. Tokaya is a kind of tonantoka. It's kind of when you can't quite remember what something is called, and you're not quite certain if you're right here. So, isogi soro hodoni. I've hastened along, I've hurried along, and I've reached a place called Flowing Sands. So, Ryusa. So is sand, and there's another character for this one, but this is the one that's used here with water on the side. That's a sort of important point here. And of course, ryu means to flow here. And as in many other plays, he waits to hear from a local person. And this local person in many plays turns out to be a god or to be a dead warrior or a dead woman or whatever. In this case, it's a river god, but I'm giving the game away a little bit here. So the curtains of the bridgeway on the no stage open and the maiste comes in, and I'll show you the one here. But the question at the bottom of the page, these two characters for sand. The one on the left is the less common one, but it's the one used most in the play. The one on the right with the stone one is used just, I think, once or twice to really mean the sand, the actual great grains of sand here. But what kind of sands flow? Well, you'll see some images later here. One possibility is this is quicksand in the desert. He doesn't quite go as far north as the Gobi Desert, but he certainly skirts south of it and goes through a tremendous amount of very arid territory. With oasis towns being difficult for him to visit here. But in the play, it's not a desert at all. It's a fast-flowing river, very fast-flowing river. So whether this was a misunderstanding or not, the historic character, the historic pilgrim, did have to encounter rivers, and this is often described. It's described much later in the book that will come to the end, the journey to the west, where there are some massive rivers too. So that's a mystery or it. But in any case, the strange man is in the performance, the 2006 performance. This is the emaciated mask, the Yasea Toko, and he's identified in the text as simply a sort of strange man. So I will sometimes use that expression. He is, in fact, the river god himself, but we find that out gradually here. And I can't resist quoting a famous quotation in a book that's coming out very soon that I've been playing a part in, which is that the French dramatist said that in Greek drama, there's something happens, but in somebody arrives, and it works better in French here. So I think this is very much true here. So someone who arrives here is someone important here. Now, there's a long lyrical passage, which is sort of out of place in a way, because it's very bucolic, very beautiful, pine-covered pines, snow in the morning, and he makes poetical allusions here. There's some borrowing from Chinese literature here, and we suddenly shift from winter to spring at one point in moonlight here. But then we get a menacing element, a menacing tone in the dialogue here, because the pilgrim has a question to ask. He wants to ask, how can I cross this river? This river is too fast for me to cross. There don't seem to be any bridges. There's also some very high mountains. How am I going to cross it here? And then the Shtei, the main character, Shtei means the person who does something. He says here, what do you mean by that? These are called the flowing sands. Pure sand flows on the river bottom. The depths are unfathomable, the distance beyond bounds. So in this case, both characters for sand appears. So yes, of course, the river does have sand at the bottom, but the flowing sand seems to be the name of the river here, or at least the way that he refers to it here. So that's not too menacing. But then he goes on to explain that there was another problem. There's some very high mountains to cross here. Now, we'll come to some maps later, but essentially the historic pilgrim went through all of the stans. It went right across China, didn't go straight to India across the Himalayas, but he went around them, even entered India from what is now Pakistan, and he went to Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan and everything else. The Pamir Mountains today are mainly in Tajikistan, but maybe as a general word, as a vague term for the big mountains in this part of the world, maybe this is possible. But the Chinese word here, or the word that's pronounced in Japanese is sore, is the Chinese way of referring even today as the Pamir Mountains. So he says there are tall mountains over there, a very steep range, and even if you get across this river, you're not going to get across them earlier here. So we still don't quite know where he is, even though we have a lot of information about the historic character, and we know approximately his route because he talks about all the temples that he visits here. But finally, we do get this place name here. And the Waki says, no, I've got to get to India. This is very important. I've got to go there here. So the Shtei then says, what's your purpose? What's your reason for going to India? Why do you desire to go to India? And the Waki repeats what he said earlier on, right in his own self-introduction, when he was essentially telling us in the audience what he was doing, is to say that he made a vow. A vow to bring the sacred sutras, the sutras, also the treatises. Three treasures refer to not just sutras, but treasures, and also the rules of the monastic life, to bring them back to Japan, but into China rather, to the capital, but particularly the Great Wisdom Sutra. So he this play simplifies all of the complicated list of 6,100 sutras to one famous one here, and to propagate Buddhism in all directions here. So this, again, it comes from the DVD, which I hope they don't mind me taking some little images like this. So that's the passage there. And you see the monk there on the right talking to the strange man here. So in his response, the Shtei gives the first hint of his real identity here. He first says, that's remarkable. And one of those of you like Charles DeWolf and others here who translate from Japanese, Jenny Beichman, I would really love some help sometime, because the word that we all use in Japanese, arigato, of course, means etymologically means something that is rare to get, difficult to obtain. That's the original meaning. And so the modern meaning of, oh, thank you, is not here, but it's something like how remarkable. But I've translated it in some other ways elsewhere where this word or similar words, similar cognate words are in the text here. So the Shtei is impressed. He's impressed that the monk has this go 4,500 kilometers or whatever it is to India here. But then he says something sinister. He says, Nanji, omae, right? Nanji, you in a past life. And they actually use two terms, a Chinese term and a Japanese term. Saki shows an unusual one, and then a more common one. In a former life, when you were before, in a former reincarnation, you made a great vow, a great promise to go to India here, but you didn't succeed in the end. You were frustrated by the lord of this river. So this river has an aruji, has a lord here, has someone who is governing the river. This is, in fact, himself, the speaker here, the person I'll call Great Sans here. And you lost your life 7 times in all. So that's the one here. But the chorus, who often speaks for the Shtei or comments on the action here, they give some hope here. And they draw on a very common Buddhist trope of a pun. It's a bit boring to explain, but Noru in the sense of writing, but Noru can also be a reading of the character we read Ho in Japanese, or Buppo, in other words, the law, the Dharma, the word that's often translated Dharma here. So he says it's very rare. You're very lucky to encounter it, but there's a boat, and the boat is the Dharma. The boat is Buddhism, and that will take you not just across this river, but the river of life. And so you mustn't give up hope. You mustn't despair, as this one here. So it's this one is here. So the pilgrim hears again about this Lord of the River, and we're getting some more details about what he looks like here. First, we hear his name here. He seems to be called Deep Sands. I'll show you the characters, if I don't mind, is there. So the Deep Sands, and Daio is, of course, Great King. Patricia told me not to use the pointer very much, so I'm making some few exceptions here. So he is demon-like in form. Sugata wa Oni no gotoku nari. So he's like an Oni, so a demon, as we say in Japan. But at the same time, the Shtei, who is that man, is that monster, he says, you can go to India and you can get that sutra here. I'll give it to you here. But it takes a little bit more time before he will give it here. And only at this point does he says, Shinja daioto wa agokoto nari. He says, it's me. I am that person here. I'm the one who impeded you, who stopped you in 7 previous lives. So a dramatic moment here. So I'm leaving out a lot of the description of stage action. There's lots of dances in this play, and they're very done. It's about 66 minutes in the DVD. So, but I want to focus on other parts here. But there's a long dance here at this point. And as he leaves the stage, the chorus repeats this promise, his own promise, conveys for the Shtei, who's busy dancing, speaking for the Shtei here, to give this wisdom sutra, the Daihanya, to the pilgrim and help him across here. And there's a nice use of the name, using this Genjō or Sanzō, both names are used here, to this point and the point later in the play that you'll see, he's actually called by name here. So first, the Deep Sands, this monster, apparently, this river god, says grant him the holy wisdom sutras. That's the Sanskrit word here. And then there's a passage which I'm having real trouble translating because it refers to ruri, which is either a light blue color or it's the lapis lazuli here. And in one alternate text, it's to go very smoothly. It's a stone, so maybe you go across the surface of the river, you skim across the surface like going across a stone. Or this is simply a descriptive term for the river, or it's both, because in Japanese poetry you can have something which works both ways, a kind of kake kotoba here. But you'll be able to pass across the river as if very easily here. There are ways on the river to be able to pass across. But wait now, Genjō, wait a while, Sanzō. So both of his two names here. So what does he wait for? Well, he's waiting in practical terms for the main actor to get off the stage and to change to change his costume, which is always a problem in No, because you need to get off the stage and we need to kill some time here. But that's the passage here. This is another translation of this one here. So if it's not lapis lazuli, we're not worried about the stone, we're just worried about the color. It's maybe something like this, but that's for something for those of you who want to consult with me or read my translation here. So then we have an I, the part of No play that some of us find very boring. This one, the only text I had was in the subtitles, but I believe it does exist. The language is too good, too old-fashioned to be made up in 1980s, where they would just repeat what happens, because the main function here is to explain in more simple language for the audience and to give some of the background here. But there are too many details that are new for it just to be made up. They would have just stuck to the script here. So this is an old, and I did see a mention of a text that I think I know where to hand it down. But in any case, he's this actor in this case is also a supernatural creature. He's a follower of the river god we're about to meet, and this is how he dresses, a very fun costume. He's also got dragon on his head, so he's also a kind of river creature, river god. And he tells the story, and he mentions other details like poisonous snake, and he mentions that the deep sands, his fellow deep sands, has fishy scales, which I've seen in lots of images that we'll be looking at here. And also a very important fact that he's wearing 7 skulls around his neck. So if you're paying attention, you probably already know what these 7 skulls are or what they could be here. But in any case, this is an interesting text that I will go to investigate. So then we move on to act of the play, and good, I've been 20 minutes in, so I'm doing okay with time, I guess. So there's a long instrumental passage here, and that typically used a very beautiful bit of staging. I've been seeing a lot of these 5th category Nos that feature supernatural figures, and they tend to use a stick drum as well as the other 2 drums and the flute. And this is the kind of passage which would get us in the right feeling of suspense for the somebody to appear. But first, we don't get we get other supernatural beings before the the Shtay comes back in his new costume here. So first we get flying beings, women, flying maidens, heavenly maidens, and you'll see the picture in a moment. And they mirror each other in their movements, and then they do the opposite, a kind of mirror image rather than exactly the same, left, left, right, right. And one thing that really struck me as I was rereading this play this week is that the chorus is often giving us, there's so much going on the stage, and it's very visual and done very well in this production, but the chorus is giving us more vision, more imagery that we don't have here. For example, we're hearing a wonderful, for me, wonderful anyway, flute and 3 drums on the stage and chanting here, but we're hearing in the words of the chorus that the storm winds sound like koto, gong, barrel drum, biwa, cymbals, flute, and reeds, the hijiriki here. So we have to imagine this kind of gagaku, absolute chaos of noise being described as well here. So I love this kind of one here. We look at that last line, all those complicated kanji, all for musical instruments of various sorts here. So the divine maidens come in. That's what they look like with the waki in the middle here. They perform another dance here, and they take him in between them on their left and right, and they transport him across the waves of the flowing sands. Now is the journey to India made possible. Well, this is about the 3rd or the 4th time that we've heard it's okay, you can go to India, but it hasn't happened yet because the play is sort of delaying it, like a Netflix series, which keeps delaying something that happens here. No, much more serious there. Okay. So there we are. So it's made possible. What a rare favor. That's another arigataya. So how to translate that sort of thing. Then we have another pair of tsure. Tsure Shtay actors who perform in not the top part, but so they're trained to do the top part here. And these are 2 dragon gods, and they're wearing a dragon head mask. We'll see the headdress, which we'll see from the side elsewhere, red wigs and so on. And they do a very dramatic dance here. So that it's a language that interests me here. And again, the chorus is giving the details which we can't imagine. These 2 represent a myriad of dragons, large and small, all flying through the air, flying from the water, of course, they're water beasts, flying into the air, flying into the distant valleys, but they're showing respect. They're showing homage to the holy man, to the pilgrim here. What a rare favor. So there again, we have this frightful word, arigatakare, which I'm having trouble with here. So the chorus again aids our imagination here. The imminent entrance of the Nochiste is heralded by, this is quoting from my translation, a maelstrom of clouds and water, the mountains and the rivers are shaken by six. So it's very over the top, but effective, I think, in my ways. And then from a cave, which we don't see on the stage, but we have mentioned a number of times, so we have to imagine there's a cave there here, a natural cave, and from this cave appears the form of this person I have translated as Deep Sands here. One more time, the character for deep, the character for sands, but a kind of watery sand here. He appears bearing on his head. Well, he's actually not wearing it on his head. He's actually carrying a backpack, an oi, but that's that to translate it literally here. So his costume is great, and we can see it here in the two performances that Yoshimasa has made of this. The one that I did from the DVD, you see the dragon on the side, and then when he did in this very Yakshiki, I don't know what happened to my typing there, the very famous temple in Nara there, with this so-called Chinese mask, and you can see the necklace around the neck with the skulls there. I should have zoomed in here. Here it is on the cover of the DVD, again with those skulls. Those skulls are, of course, the pilgrim in his previous incarnation, who he's killed 7 times before, but he's not going to kill him this time here. So Deep Sands turns to reveal the backpack, not a very nice word, so I've used the word sutra case, but it is really like a backpack on his, and the Dragon King sets it down and takes out a scroll, and it's given then to the pilgrim, and he says, I present it to you, and then he opens the upper drawer and takes it out. So it's quite a big thing. We'll see lots of pictures of that backpack later here, and this is the part which I think is really remarkable here. He gives them to Sanzo, and then Sanzo opens the scroll, and you'll see a photograph in a second. He holds it in front of him very formally here. So he's been given this precious thing. He was picking up scrolls and getting information on Buddhism on his way to India, but there's no idea that he got this particular famous scripture in the middle of Central or Western Asia. He got it in India, but in any case, in this case, he got it here. But not just that. They read together. They read in unison this line here. Dai Hanya, I won't try to sing it, but Dai Hanya Hara Mitakyo Kandaichi, the first volume of the Great Wisdom Sutra. But it's the next line, which is extraordinary here. Sanzō Hōshi Busho Yaku to. Yaku is yaksha. It's translated. So not only is he got the Screw Sutra, but it's already in Chinese. He's already translated it. So what a miracle this one is here. And this, he said, this is a quotation, so there's a little top at the end, so make it literal. So here's what the scene looks like in the DVD production here. They're singing together, the stage behind the mask you can't see, but he's also reading this very formally, this sort of high point of the play here. So yeah, so they're all of them on stage for this key moment. This is again from the DVD one. So the chorus then goes on to describe the miraculous effect of this reading here, quoting, saying that all the evil deeds and demons disappear for thousands of miles, and all sorts of good things are happening. And then the Shite makes some very important problems. He has been a monster up to now. He's killed him 7 times before, but from now on, he's going to be a guardian god. And that is how this Deep Sands is remembered in Japan in many temples that I'll be showing you some images from. He's remembered as a Buddhist guardian god, as someone who is actually enabling this important monk to go to India to complete what turned out to be a remarkable, successful journey here. So the Waki, as often happens to know, the Waki describes his own action in like a third person. He says he shoulders the case and he's helped to put on the sutra case behind him, and bows in respect to Deep Sands. And then they line up on stage, and the DVD includes an interview with the Kanzei Yoshimasa talking about how they decided on the choreography for this. Obviously, they wanted to indicate the idea that the river is going to part, like the Red Sea, the waters of the Red Sea parting here. The rivers are going to part. So how to do that on the stage without any water whatsoever here? Well, they line out and they fan out here, and they hold still, and the music reaches a peak, and there's a fantastic moment on the flute. So here they are fanning out here, and we can see the pilgrim with his backpack there in the foreground here, and we have to imagine here that he is now crossing the river where the water is. It's the water bed, on the bed of the river, and he can walk straight across cross here. So here it is, and this is the oral description. So we get this visual description, and we get oral description by the chorus about the way the river parted to the right and the left, creating flat sand. One more time, we have sand there, the sand at the bottom. And overjoyed, he walks to the other side of the river. And when he reached it, he turns back. The deep sands, the river god, now a guardian god, looks at him here, and he seems to be sad that the pilgrim is leaving. There's a sense of sadness, of very typical of many Japanese things. And he says, "Tomaruzo, Sanzo, Tomaruzo, Sanzo." Stop there. And Sanzo turns around, the pilgrim turns around, and he takes his leave. He bows maybe one more time, and he says, "I have crossed the river," and then he continues on his journey. And the play ends with these words of the chorus. Very often plays ends with words like he disappeared. In this case, is he goes into the river. So iri nikeri, he's kind of got into the river here. So he deep sands, gazed down into the unfathomable abyss, the depths of the river, and disappeared from view into the infernal mud. And a very unusual character. His word here is used for hell, but they had lots of words that came from Sanskrit from this. And that's where the play ends. And the Yushite holds up his sleeve to indicate emotion, the emotion of parting, and then leaves. And in this production, I haven't focused on that, but they actually had two entrances and exits. They also have one in the center of the stage, which is not possible in a normal Noh stage. So that's the Noh play. And I'm pretty much on time now, because now I'm going to move on to the reception history, the great cultural history going back in time. And I'm not going to go forward, because were I interested in modern Japanese culture, I could talk about One Piece. Is it called One Piece? I could talk about Dragon Ball. I know nothing about it. I'd want to know nothing about it, but apparently this is very distantly related to the journey to the West, which I will talk a little bit about here. But the certain figures of this has been. But let's talk about the old ones here. This is one of the earliest images, and I only discovered it a couple of days ago here. This is in the famous Tonko, if you pronounce it Japanese, the Dongwang, those wonderful caves that were discovered in central China. Which contain Buddhist murals and sculptures, and also many texts in many languages too. And this actually shows Xuanzang shows the pilgrim on his return journey with even an elephant to carry the many sutras here. But he probably needed a whole procession, a whole tremendous number of camels and horses are described in other texts here. We know about his journey because he was ordered by the Chinese emperor to actually write an account, which was dictated and written down by one of his two books, two accounts. There's a biography of him, and there's a sort of an account where he mentions all the kingdoms he passes by and what he did. So we actually have quite a lot of information about him, far more than about the 15th century that I would like to know. But so this is one of the early images here. Let's go to Japan then. So since the really talk is in Japan here, there's no question that he was news of this famous pilgrim, and the sutras that he brought back became very quickly known in Japan, because temple monks came from China to Nara, Japan regularly. There was still regular contact then. And the Hosso school of Buddhism, which I mentioned before, that's very much a Nara-based Buddhism. They were using the texts that he did and very much looked at him. So this is temples. This is the image of the deep sands. So you notice snake iconography. Maybe that's like a trident here. Also a flaming thing. There's some water imagery. This is an image which is even more. He's sometimes pronounced ginger. You see the first character is voiced sometimes. Sometimes in the play I've been saying Shinja because it's not voiced here. Sometimes he refers as a general. Sometimes he's a great king. But interestingly, punningly, he's also sometimes referred to as a true serpent, using the characters meaning true and snake or serpent here. Well, serpents are also water gods too. The Chinese sources often refer to him by a word meaning God. Here, this is a Kamakura image, and it's worth looking at the iconography here. If we zoom in here, we see that there's a snake around his hand. He's also got rather scary. I love his whatever those knee coverings are called, and he's clearly on water here. So, and he's got this strange, also human face pointing out his belly. But what is most striking is, of course, the skulls around his neck. Now, here's a bit of a mystery because it's natural that he should have skulls since he's killed many people, many former pilgrims or Xuanzang former life here. But as we'll see, Xuanzang also has one. But in Japan, just a few years, so really there's Nara examples, Heian examples, Kamakura examples, but in the period that I'm concerned with, the Muromachi period here, we do have one other amazing work here, and I'll just hold it up for you to see, a 3-volume emaki, an illustrated scroll, a picture scroll, must have been very expensive to produce, must have been produced under imperial or very princely patronage. So a large group of calligraphers and painters created this amazing scroll showing his whole journey and also his return from his time in India and his return journey as well. So I'm interested because the text itself, which has also been transliterated here, not translated, but summarized and with a transcription, also discusses things. So this is one image which clearly, it's called Genjō Sanzō, his name in emaki. And this image here is the closest in all of these hundreds and hundreds of pictures here of him crossing something. But it's not the same as the story that I'm concerned with. So there were obviously alternate stories about him crossing. But it is a miraculous crossing because he's walking on lotus leaves here, and there are dragons in the water. So the text itself at this point is interesting to study, and I'll be writing about this when I get to publish this, but this is a massive one here. But what about him in the desert? What about him in these flowing sands here? Well, there is a passage earlier in the text here which describes how he went across a wasteland strewn with corpses, skeletons, dead travelers, people who didn't make it, the water one here. And when he reached something that is called Ryusa, the characters are written, these flowing sands, he sees strange beings, these barbarians in these furry costumes, which are shown here. And these Ryusa are meant to be quicksands here. And here we have the text itself. This is the text of the picture scroll here. And I've one here. That's the characters for these one here. Ryusa o tadori yukuni, when he arrived at the floating sand. But unfortunately, there's no more details about the flowing sands, except it's clearly not water. It's the desert. And there is a Chinese film, which I've been enjoying watching. I went through it quickly, and I watched the first half again yesterday. The desert scenes are rather too long, but he's clearly suffering hallucinations, mirages, and what looks like quicksand in one part here. But the other fascinating thing about this Chinese one, which you can watch free on with the link I've given you, is that he's wearing the wonderful backpack here. So it's actually following the historical account that Xuanzang, let's pronounce it, the pilgrim dictated in the 7th century rather closely, as they say. Not the best of films, and this scene with the skeletons and the rivers of sand here. There are rivers that feature in the movie, but they're not the one here. So this is clearly close to the historical text, which was more freely handled later here. But anyway, if you're interested here. Coming back to that backpack again here. Here, that backpack in the movie was clearly modeled on these famous Tokyo National Museum pictures here. There are two versions. I saw the one on the left in the Mitsubishi Memorial Museum, the exhibition the other day here. So one from 14th century, the one on the right, 13th to 14th century. Both of them feature a necklace, but apparently, according to all of the catalogs I've consulted, they're also skulls. So he is also remembering his, lucky escape from death or whatever by wearing skulls. The skulls of himself in former lives. There's no explanation that I found so far, but this is a detail that I looked at this painting many times before I realized, and then I read the details here. Here's another one. This is a Chinese image. There are many, many more, of course, from China here, but this one I've chosen because he's riding on a horse. A white horse becomes part of his mythology later in the Journey to the West, the much later Chinese novel here. But here, clearly on the right, here is a creature who looks very much to me like Deep Sands, my image of Deep Sands, holding what looks like a sutra case there. So there we are. A little geography. I won't bore you too much here, but Chang'an is there on the right here. He goes north. He goes to Donghuang, where the caves are. skirts south of what is usually regarded as the Gobi Desert, but it's certainly very, very dry. He was not able to. There were border posts, but he left without permission, so he had to be careful of not being arrested and sent back to China and being punished here. And then he goes, as you see, the Pamir Mountains, and he goes actually north of there. So these are points. I made this map and then added dots as you can with, and then saved it so that I could make my own map. There are, of course, plenty of maps in all the books I've done here. So he goes into Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, probably crossed into Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. So he does pretty much all of the stans except the one at the top there here. And yes, there's some water. There's some massive lakes here and massive hills here. So what do we learn about this one here? If you're interested in the countries, these are just some of them here. So, well, we have back to the other or nearly contemporaneous picture scroll that I found so fascinating here. So his own account is the Great Tang Dynasty record of the Western kingdoms here, not to be confused with the Journey of the West. This is which is almost like 1,000 years later. This is the Great Tang Dynasty record, so a historical record here that mentions it, and it does mention dragons, but very vaguely. He just has reports of dragons, and the closest representation in the Japanese picture scroll that I can find is of horses dying as they attempt this difficult mountain crossing. But we hear about mountains in my no play, but we don't hear a mountain crossing. But I thought this was interesting, and here is actually that account from the famous record which he had dictated here. There are frequent disasters caused by ferocious dragons. So clearly, dragons were part of the mythology, that you might meet dragons on the way or other ones, but river gods, no. There's also some quite nice landscapes he goes through, and there was some quite nice landscapes described in the no play, rather beautiful scenery as well. And just before the last major thing, this Iron Gate here, the Iron Gate that is basically, once you pass the Iron Gate, you're in safe territory. You're near big cities where Buddhism is welcome, and you can find ones here. So this is the last stage of his journey. So the epilogue now. Yeah, I'm in good time here. So in August, after I produced this translation for a conference on No in Pittsburgh, where we all presented our new research, and I've revised it extensively and continued to work on it on and off. And one of the things, I had an opportunity in summer to see a friend perform in a No play, performed very brilliantly, an Italian friend, as the main actor. And we took the opportunity in Kyoto to go to Mount Hiezan, where, to my shame, I've never been, even though it features in many of the texts that I studied over the years. And there's me with a big tree. And Hiezan is, maybe some of you know, there's Yokawa over there, which features in Genji. There's the kind of Western temple here, the Eastern temple here. So it was this Eastern temple here, which had which, though of course there were sculptures, there are just a tremendous number of temples surviving. Many, of course, were destroyed. This was one that was actually brought there because Hideyoshi actually burnt most of the temples, and then he stole this temple from the rival temple of Midyara, which is down near the great lake of Biwa here, and he brought it there. So the temple is the temple originally was very old, 9th century, but it was rebuilt. But inside the temple there are some images, and we were not allowed to take photographs, but I bought every pamphlet that I could here, so we could get this close and even a little closer. But this is from the pamphlet here. So you see here it actually says that these are 16 gods, and we have Genjō Sanzō. We have the one here on the left here. I've blown it up. It's not a very catalogue, wasn't very good photographs here, but he's clearly wearing his backpack here. And on the right, so he's with these 16 deities, and on the right there are another 16 deities, and there is the character here pronounced Jinja Taisho, so he's a general deep sans, and with 8 deities here. So they're very much seen as a pair. So he's very much a guardian god, and in the middle we have Shakyamuni Shakyamuni there here. And so a little blown up the pictures, a bit hard to work out, but he's clearly very scary looking, red colored. He's got skulls around his neck, as we expect with the iconography. So interestingly, though, the same catalog had little images to explain to Japanese and of all educations what they're about here. And I thought these were helpful because they show the snake iconography. I couldn't make out the snake from the distance I was standing, and rather webbed feet, so rather aquatic, of the deep sands. But on the right, we have the famous pilgrim, but he's got two creatures on the back. And I think you know who they might be, because I keep holding up the famous Journey to the West, which some of you may know through Arthur Waley's wonderful translation, Monkey. Arthur Waley gives names for the companion. Well, Monkey was easy enough, but the pig-like character is called Pigsy, very British. And there is a character called Sandy. And his name actually begins with that character for sand that we keep on seeing here. And why is he not on the back here? I mean, this is just a cartoonist idea here. Well, there is actually a whole chapter in early on in the Journey to the West where they meet, they come to a river, and they have a great fight with this river god. So many people explain this the monk. He's a monk-like figure. He's the figure, sorry, if I may use again here, he's the figure here that maybe he derives from some sort of memory of this river god. But I'm actually not, although I do like Chinese novels, early modern novels. This is about as far as modern as I'm going to get in my talk here today. So I'm going to wrap up here. I've been going very fast. So yeah, so this is of course the one of the great four great Chinese novels, and from this spurred an enormous number of modern versions, very cheesy Chinese versions here. I don't actually, I like the original, but many of the modern versions are maybe of less interest. But if you're interested in popular culture, of course, this is also spammed video games and so forth here. But it is fascinating that this sandy monster, this sandy deep sands, seems to have found the way in the text. But this is the author, the Ming period author, was basing this work, this late 16th century work, on much earlier Chinese legends. So I'm not saying there's any direct link to there. Simply, there's a whole web of different stories about the pilgrim. But unusually, unlike a lot of legendary characters where everything is legend and then there are lots of legends, we do actually have a historical core here with quite a lot of biographical and geographical information, and then lots of fantasy afterwards. So it's fancy, the fantasy and imagination comes afterwards here. So one more time, the first character in Jinja or Shinja in some pronunciations is the sand here, and so this may be the name. And of course, if you do image searches and database searches, you can find sometimes you can find images like the one in the middle where we have skulls, we have scaly skin, which was mentioned in the no play, webbed feet, which we often saw. So clearly this character was very much alive. This is clearly a Japanese from a Japanese printed book. Sometimes he's illustrated more like what we think of as a kappa, as a water sprite here, the particular face here, the bald head. But again, we've got the skulls here. So these are some of the many images here. Just to sum up, I'm going to have loads of time. I've got more images, but I think I've exhausted you, and I went very fast, I know, but I wanted to end nicely. So he left Chang'an, modern Xi'an, in 629. Took maybe 4 years to get to India, very difficult journey, and then spent a long time. The modern film shows that he was learning Sanskrit before, which is not impossible because Sanskrit teachers had come the opposite journey, and many of the early sutras were translated by people who knew Sanskrit and had learned Chinese. But he was one of the major figures in China who learned Sanskrit and also other Indian languages and translated directly from Sanskrit. And why? Because the earlier translations were not considered good enough or polished enough Chinese and so on. So when he returned, it was an easier journey on the way back. He had a lot of institutional support from Buddhists in India and elsewhere on the route. He took a more southerly route, but it seemed to have gone more slowly. Certainly in his own account, or the account that he dictated, he doesn't have any major adventures. A bit of trouble with rivers and cargo going overboard, that sort of thing. But he brought back this enormous collection of sutras, and then a special library was built, a special translation institute was built with imperial support. He refused official rank. He wanted to concentrate on his research, which one understands. Many of us are retired here, wants to concentrate on our research after years of doing other things here. And so he died. He spent the last almost 20 years very profitably translating himself and directing many people people to work on the translations, and these translations are the versions that we know today. So all of you know Hanya Shinkyo, for example. The Hanya Shinkyo is a tiny, tiny fragment from the much longer Great Wisdom Sutra, I believe, and the version that's used in Japan is his Chinese. There are other translations directly from Tibetan and directly from Sanskrit here, but the one that's used, the one that's chanted, and some of us have been to temples where you write a character. It's about 120 characters, right? So you may have done it yourselves here. So here's a major figure, and yet I realized how ignorant I was about a lot of him here. I think I have 1 more minute, so I'll just say there are other plays about China and Japan which give a very different picture, and I'll just end with this one here. The much more famous play that's in the repertoire and performed often here, it's been very well translated by Tyler and also Morrill into English and also into French, is one where there's a monk, a true monk again, a monk, a moi, a very major figure in Japanese Buddhism, who is planning to go to China and then to India, and he's dissuaded. He said, you don't need to go to China. You don't need to go to India. Everything is already here in Japan. We've already got sacred spots in Japan. So, forget about it. And he forgets about it here. So it's a sort of mirror image of this play here. So, and there are other sort of plays which reflect a sort of anti-Chinese feeling, but certainly we don't have that in the text we have here. So I'll end here. I think it's just coming up to 8 o'clock, and I hope there were some questions, and I'm happy to go back and show some slides, but I'll stop staring for now. Over to you, Patricia.
Okay, everybody, if you'd like to unmute, please do so. That was perhaps the speediest presentation we've ever had. My head is rolling through the desert sand here. We have, at the moment, there's 4 questions, and if there's any more people, please throw them into the chat. The first one from Michael Plastow says, the story puts me very much in mind of the Sai no Kawara boundary and the Jizo tradition in Japanese Buddhism. Would it be going too far to interpret this as a Jizo allegory of Jizo bringing Genjō's 7 generations long tormented soul to the Pure Land?
Well, I would certainly Jizo is often seen as a sort of patron saint of children, patron saint of travelers, someone who looks after us, and that's why he's a wayside saint that people pray to here. And yet it's he's a bosatsu as well. He's a bodhisattva. Yeah. Tell me about the Sai no Kawara boundary here. I know there are, this idea of liminal boundaries is something that a lot of people do in their research. I hadn't even thought of that. I think he is separate from Jizo. There are many guardian gods. Buddhism loves multiplying guardian gods of all sorts here. So I think they have different functions, but they might be performing a similar function. But Michael?
Well, Sino-Quara, the image is very similar to the Sino-Quaras that we see in the mountains. So basically a dry riverbed filled with sand and stones. And Jizo, I think in that period of medieval Japanese Buddhism, was seen very much as the bodhisattva who helped people across the boundary to whatever next life they were aiming for, out of purgatory into new life. It's also very much the era of Pure Land Buddhism, when many sects were, as I understand it, were taking Jizo very seriously, not just as a figure of popular faith, but as what can I say, a sort of avatar of various Japanese gods. It sort of fits the period.
Right.
It looks like a Jizo story from the period, the sort of things you would see in Buddhist art of that period. So I'm just displaying my ignorance, really. But
I mean, in terms of, I'm not a Buddhist scholar, though one has to sort of quickly bone up in these things, as it were. But, the Hosso school, then, the Tendai, and then Shingon, and then the Pure Land. I mean, many of them share some of the same texts. Some schools, of course, certain texts become important, like the Lotus Sutra for certain sects later. This is interesting because and I should ask my friend Brian Rupert in Yokohama more about this. apart from clearly the Nara sects of Buddhism, which continue to today, particularly play particular interest in this particular very long sutra, rather than later ones here. But certainly guardian gods. When we travel, we need to, you and your hikes, I'm sure, pay proper respect to the gods as you pass them. I think it's fascinating. And dry riverbed is an interesting concept too. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I think I'll stop there because I'll just reveal more ignorance.
And I'm able to. Right.
Okay. Okay. Well, we have just something from Diego on his iPad. He says, are there any parallels between this play and Kasuga Ryujin about Mihoe giving up his journey to India?
That's the one that I ended with, Diego, if you're listening. So that one here, you mean, yeah. So very well. They're parallels in the sense that it's an opposite. It's a mirror image of being persuaded to go to continue on your journey, helped to be continued on the journey, rather than being persuaded not to go. So that's a much more famous play. But what is interesting is that they're both historical characters, both historical people who did, had a major impact here. But this idea that you don't need to travel to learn things is very different, because clearly Genjō Sanzō believed in traveling and actually getting hold of texts and to learn from masters in Buddhism. He didn't think that everything in Japan was enough. So yeah, good.
Okay. Charles DeWolf asks, revealing my geographical illiteracy, how many possible routes were there from China to India?
Well, very many. Yeah, it's a good question. There are, of course, a great number of books about the Silk Road, which is the term itself is an invention by a German of the 19th century, and it was not just for silk, and it went in both directions here, and it was not one road. That's a misunderstanding. There was also a sea road route too, and roads became impassable, or there were political problems, and so they take alternative routes. There were a number of different routes, and so the route he takes back is considerably further south. It joins up finally at the end here, but it starts in a similar way and then comes up. So yes, there were different routes that were taken. I've just been finishing a more recent work on the Silk Road, which is where people have actually looked at not all of the silk or the fancy trade, but the very little trade that goes on. A lot of it was just to the next town. So people wouldn't necessarily go the whole journey, but there were merchants who would travel, and it was safe to travel in the caravan. And they traveled, they did barter, but because the Chinese wanted to protect the what they thought of as their western frontier here, they brought soldiers there, or warriors who needed to be paid, and so there was a coin economy too, but a lot of it was paid, so silk and other materials. And so yes, it's the geography. There is now. I'd love to be able to be in England at the moment, because there's apparently a great exhibition in the British Museum. They said we regrettably have to use the word Silk Road, even though it's slightly misleading for a number of reasons. There's not one road and so on, but apparently it's very good. And there's a good mention. My sister sent me of my fellow, as she said, "This is your guy, isn't it?" She said, Xuanzang, what was his name? Yeah, that's your guy, isn't it? And she said the picture that Patricia used on Facebook, which turns out not to be him, actually. That rather one. It turns out to be, no, it wasn't it was my mistake. The British Museum thinks everybody would think it's him because he's wearing a backpack, but he's too Central Asian in appearance. The theory now is he is just another Three Treasures monk. There were others, but so when we say Sanzo, when we say three treasures, or Tripitaka is sometimes used. The Sanskrit word tri for three, and the Tripitaka, it actually means three baskets. But these are the three types of texts that were important: the sutras themselves, the treatises about them, and the rules and regulations. So yeah, very rich cultural history. There's been a lot of work done on Chinese imagery of him. tohaku also has a stele, in other words, a written document, written stone carving, and they've got the ones which mentions him extensively. So yeah, he's everywhere. Once you remember the characters, Genjō, little difficult to remember the Jo. I couldn't write it. Then you'll see him. You'll see him everywhere, and he's often also shown in pictures where he's among sacred people, among divinities, including, of course, his friend Deep Sands. But he's also shown with other monks, Indian monks, Chinese monks, and then Japanese monks who founded this Hoso school in Nara here. So he's very much seen in the lineage of monks. Yeah.
May I just say something about the route from China to India?
Yeah.
So in the 1860s, the British seriously tried to sort of look into whether a railway could be built from China to India through what is now Myanmar. And they concluded that it was impossible. I mean, a few people did manage to make that, to get across that, but it is very difficult. And it's still an aim of China to build that route, but it's phenomenally difficult. So I think and if you think about the challenges that the Chinese have managed to overcome, you can imagine how difficult it is, and you can also imagine how very useful it would be. Tremendous, really would be useful to them to have this connection to the Indian Ocean. So I think what it is that they had to go completely around the Himalayas, didn't they?
That's right.
So there was no possibility of a direct route from India to China, but someday there may be.
Right, and thank you, Robert. That really reminded me, actually, because a lot of the interest, the 19th century interest in what they call the great. What's the word? Great. There's a word for it. Is it a great adventure?
Great game.
Great game, the great game, when the Russians, the French, the English, the Germans were exploring Central Asia, coming in from Afghanistan. They were using this ancient Chinese text, essentially a Chinese geography that was compiled by Xuanzang. They were using it to find information, and some of them were interested in looking for ancient Buddhism, and of course, the Donghuang materials were scattered to Petersburg, Paris, and the British Museum. But they were also practical reasons. They were being asked by, as you say, by the colonial governments in India to find out information that might be useful for colonial purposes. And the French and the Russians were at it for the same reason. And Japanese, some of the major, investigations were Japanese, partly for interest out of Buddhism, but, partly for geopolitical, what do we call it? Geopolitical reasons, the early 20th century. One of the places he visited was Bariam, the places where the Taliban destroyed a standing Buddhist there. He visited that place, and that was first investigated. One of the nice things about the Smithsonian Museum was that they had a lot about the early archaeological work that was done by Japanese, which has actually preserved a lot of the pictures that now don't exist. Yeah, sorry. More questions.
Yes. From Michelle I. She says, "Thank you for the wonderful talk. In the end of the No play, why does the chorus warn the walkie as he's crossing the river of flowing sand?"
Right. Well, Michael I has been helping me read another great Chinese classic, so I know him well. Michael, I don't think they're warning him. This is a sort of sign of feeling sad at parting, feeling sad to have to say goodbye. So they're not sort of warning him. They're really just saying stop. Stay a little bit longer. Let's not have a drink together. But they're doing definitely. It's just gives a nice feeling at the end that there's a sense of regret. It's very strange character change for this rather fierce monster to show such regret, where he's determined. He turns back, looks back, and then continues on his journey. He's not going to wait another moment for his journey here. So I wouldn't take it as a warning. I would take this as simply a sense of sadness at parting. Yeah.
Okay. Liz Lang wonders about the seven skulls. She says, "Why seven? Does seven have special significance in Buddhism?"
Well, yeah, East Asian numbers often do. I don't know because there is also an alternative tradition about 9 lives, 9 previous lives. So I'll have to look into that here. But yes, a lot of things are connected in numbers, and Buddhists have 5 sufferings and all sorts of things are numbered here. Very good question. I'll definitely check that one here. So yeah, Ian is just saying goodbye, and Diego, right. Michael Plasto, you've asked about how big the party was, how many people. Well, he definitely has. He mentions in his record that he was given a local guide. A local guide came along and helped him, but then wanted to kill him. The guide was afraid of his family getting in trouble because essentially he was leaving without permission. And that one night he woke up and the man had a knife over him. And this is a big scene in the movie version because it's clearly something they could use to make a drama. This recent movie that was made that's identified. So he was often very much alone on his journey, although it seems implausible. And so yes, on his way back, he had an enormous party. Yeah, so he was relying on people to help, and some of the people. One very rich and powerful king, wanted him to stay and to become their Buddhist teacher, and then essentially imprisoned him before allowing him to go on. He was held up. So that's one reason it took him 4 years. That sometimes people either caused trouble, wanted him to turn back, or they didn't want him to go because they were desperate to have such a learned man to be there to revive them. So, but
can I just ask a very general question about No as well? I tend to think of No and kabuki together, but in actual fact, kabuki is very profane. Is No always sacred? Is every No play involve supernatural beings or gods in some form or other?
No. There are no plays that are so-called present time no, which so the Mugen no is when it's a dead person coming, ghost speaking. But there are plays which occur in real time. So the time in the no play is the time we see on stage, and they often deal with family squabbles, husband and wife arguments, nasty stepmothers, nasty stepfathers or parents. They deal with family problems. No, there are quite a few now like that. They tend not to be the ones that people prioritize because people like that very spiritual side of No, but there are plenty of them. So there's the God No, there's the warrior No, the women No, and there's a mixed category. The biggest category is category 4, which is mixed, which is all sorts of things. And then there's the fifth category. This is the fifth category play. Is a real mixed bag, but some of them are about supernatural beings, but some of them are about Tengu, for example. Well, they're supernatural, I guess. But it's so yes, there's a great variety there.
And did that change over time?
Yes, well, a lot of these plays that I read that are no longer part of the repertoire. Many of them are spirit plays because it's essentially rather easy to write, I guess. So somebody, a relative of yours or your lord, or dies in a battle in Kyushu somewhere. Sorry, not to be rude to Kyushu, but there were lots of battles, lots of plays set in these regional wars. And you could write a play about it because you could have this person come on the battlefield, going to a battlefield, and then meeting the ghost, and the ghost tells the stories. So that continues too. But they would also take these, what they call, there's a name for it here, but essentially local gossip, stories about something that happened, and they would fictionalize them. So there is a great variety of plays. And of course, their plays continue to be written today, and there are many post-Meiji plays as well, but they don't tend to stick in the repertoire long. They tend to be performed once or twice. But yes, the general perception is that all ghost plays, but it's by no means true.
Can I just
Yes,
follow
please. There's no more questions in the chat.
Michael
So
was saying, can I just follow after what Michael was saying? I just wonder, you've just been talking about these the fifth category plays and so on. But how often were they played in the Edo period, and did they stop being played more or less in the Meiji period when the sort of spiritual aspect of No was sort of advertised?
Yes, the Meiji period was a major crisis, but not because of that so much as because of institutional support. The Edo period, they had very good support from daimyo. They had great support from regional lords, many of them who would be amateurs who would study No. They would have no theaters in all of the castle towns. So there were no playwrights. The reason why the canon, the number of plays that were performed regularly, gets smaller, the major reason is because no groups, these troops of no players, traveled around, and they had to be ready at a drop of a hat to perform a play. So they had only so many costumes, only so many masks, and they of course had to, knew certain plays by memory. So they had lists of plays drawn up, and they would then say, well, this is our menu, this is what we can do. And so gradually plays fell out of fashion, but new plays were produced because there were also amateurs. There were people who were teaching No, so supplementing their income. So semi-professionals or professional singers, but just like no performers today teach chanting. They would supplement the income just for people performing No plays, not on the stage, but simply with maybe a flute, maybe a drum, but maybe just kneeling and singing it. So the texts that we have, and we have hundreds and hundreds of texts. Texts were texts that of plays that were no longer performed, but continue to be read and recited. So these big Meiji editions I have 500 texts in them, and 500 or more. So there were many texts which survived. What happened in the 20th century, so after the Meiji period, was that the scholars got to work, and then they really wanted to focus more on understanding the great Zeami, the great early period of No, and they were less interested. Fortunately, this extraordinary man called Tanaka Makoto, from 1953 until the late 80s, produced 57 volumes without any annotation of 2,500 No plays, which were in multiple editions. So he found them in manuscript and things. So the number of plays that have survived. So it's actually relatively accessible for someone like me who's got a library to actually to look at these plays. But they're of cultural interest, but they're not necessarily great masterpieces. But I'm always looking for interesting plays. But this is an exception in that this play wasn't forgotten and really works in production. It really works, and it works on the page, I hope, even in my translation. So that's why it interests me. Right.
And so was there for example, European attitudes to the No, for example, Claudel and also Yeats, and what they took and from Fenellosa's things, did that have any influence back on Japan and the choice of plays?
Yes, well, there was certain. I mean, Japanese obviously certainly like with the Tale of Genji, and for certain other works, the idea that foreigners were interested. The early reports, Mitford and many of the British, they thought, oh, just dreadful noise. George Sampson thought it was just dreadful. People even who translated No didn't like it, but certain people like Mary Stopes, who was a chemist, or what was she? She did work with, as a scientist, wasn't she? She had a PhD in science. She translates No very well. So there were Westerners who watched No, even got the help of Japanese to help them translate. Fenellosa didn't read Japanese well, but he had a student to help him, and he wrote, of course, very influential translations, which were then modified by Pound, who never came to Japan and knew even less Japanese, but were very influential. So that was important. Whether it really mattered to people in Japan, I think is less clear. So I think there is better argument for Genji, somehow the popular elsewhere of Genji getting back into Japan, but even that is debatable. Yeah.
Michael, I have a question that's a little off of the theatrical topic, but it's connected to the Monkey King and how your No play ties in so well to it. I've been a big fan of the Monkey King since I first read the novel in university, and I've watched most of the film versions and TV versions of how the story has been translated. And one of the things that struck me is your sand god, your demon god, is very much in the Monkey King, one of the three demons that was tricked into protecting Sanzō Hōshi on the journey. And in film, almost invariably, that necklace of skulls is around the neck of the character. So it's very much the same character brought into this story. And I was just very curious. Obviously, the Monkey King story came out way after your No play was originally written, and yet, there is this overlap kind of thing. I was just curious how you feel about this No play, at least being one influence on this tremendous. This is popular throughout all of Asia. in all the forms, not including Dragon Ball, which actually is a pretty creative interpretation. But
Yeah.
how do you feel about how this being a part of this?
Well, I think these are different branches. That we simply have, we have an original story with a historical record which continued to be read. There are copies of that record in the temples in Nara. It was continued to be copied in right through Japanese history, and in China, people read the text because it was great for geography and things. So we have these stories, and then we have more popular retellings of the stories. So like a lot of this Ming-Qing fiction draws on older works here. So there are clearly older legends that he's taking from. Some of them happen to overlap with the source may be this. Some of the source material is the same. Certainly the skull thing appears in early dates here. So so it wouldn't be coming directly from the No. That's implausible.
Of course not. Yeah.
Yeah, but the No is drawing on clearly a strong tradition in Japan, which never, right from 700s, 800s, 900s, right through the Heian Kamakura Muromachi period, there seems to be unbroken. There more sculptures, more images, and no doubt much that we've lost in terms of oral literature. Or he's mentioned in Charles de Wolfe translated a lot of the Konjaku Monogatari Shu. There are several sections there about him here. He's a major figure, this one. So lots of stories about our pilgrim. So yes, that's fascinating. I'm sort of trying not to. I was trying not to. Well, first not to go, too deep into the monkey, which I love too, and also I'm saving it up because I'm reading the Red Chamber at the moment. I'm reading the story of the stone. I'm rereading it, and I've just finished the Water Margin, so I think I can only handle two long Chinese books at a time here. But it's on my list because I haven't finished reading the translation, the excellent translation by you there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. That was very helpful. Yeah, David.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah. May I ask something?
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Watson, for the wonderful talk. And I was a little bit confused about the end of the No play, where the chorus is, feeling sentimental about the parting of the walkie. But yeah, and going back to how the walkie enters, which is interesting, that you have this pun on Michio Aki, the way is open, or but also the season of the autumn. So I was wondering about do you see the kind of poetic of autumn sorrow in the way
not in that opening one, because the two meanings would be this well, it is written with the character autumn here, but it's an old name for Japan, and the different etymologies suggested for it. But I don't think it's autumn in the sense which is often also akiru. It's like to give up, to be satiated, to be like men going off women is often aki is. That sense, I don't think that's it. I think it's purely poetic here, and it's a nuisance. That's in the first line, so it needs a footnote. You either leave it out of the translation or explain it here. But certain puns are very common in there. There are two major poetic sources for this play, and like a lot of plays. One is Chinese poetry, Chinese poem kanchi, either done in China or mainly in this play. They're basically Chinese sources, including some very ancient Chinese poems. So some of the poems. Some of the poetic language is very Sinitic, very Chinese. But then the other thing, which is very typical of many No plays, is waka poetics, the use of puns, the use of kakikoboto, and that's what makes No translation so hard, because a word can be, it can be connected grammatically and with the previous phrase and have a different meaning in the next one. That's why I'm having so much trouble with this lapis lazuli, rudi. Is it really just a color, or is it used to describe something? Because another text describes it like on the surface of rudi no ban, which sounds like some sort of very, very thing here. So, but that's one of the pleasures. It's like doing Wordle, or it's like doing a word thing. It's playing with the ones, playing with puns. So.
Buddhism.
Sorry.
Okay, it's almost 8:30. Shall we end the official recording here?
Right.
Okay, let's give Michael a big hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. It was excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.